Hi, curious friends. Welcome to the Building Your Best Brain podcast. We are, if you're new here, you've come to the tail end of the Balanced Brain series. So, on the Building Your Best Brain podcast, we're all around giving education related to neuroscience, and in particular, how to use neuroscience to better our day to day life. And what we've been doing more recently, with the exception of last week, because last week I interrupted our Balanced Brain series to unpack my PhD defense. So I just finished. It's official like a whistle. I don't know if that's an expression, but here it is. Official like a whistle that I have a PhD in neuroscience. All the checks are checking. I have convocation happening in a few months from now, but that's really kind of like a formality, a bit of a ceremony. But last week I did interrupt the Balanced Brain to talk about what I did to prepare for my PhD defense. And the prep had very little to do with actually studying and preparing. But other than that, what we've been doing recently on the podcast is focusing on different themes so that we can unpack the science in a bit more bite-sized pieces in order to get a deeper level of understanding, with the hopes that you'll be able to have a deeper level of integration so that you're able to use the tools, the knowledge in your day-to-day life so that you're showing up as the fullest, most well-resourced, and really the most you version that you can. And so we're on episode 4 of the Balanced Brain, and I'll link in the show notes the ones that we have covered so far. You don't need to listen to them in order to get something out of this episode today, but I do encourage you to go back and listen to those. There's a lot of great value in that. But before I dive into what will probably be the last episode of the Balanced Brain, and then we're going to shift gears, is what do I mean by the balanced brain? I certainly do not mean a perfect brain. I don't even mean an optimal brain, but essentially what I mean is a flexible brain. So a brain that's able to, potentially experience different extremes, right? Whether that's, physiologically having high brain activity, or maybe on a more human, expression phenotype level, experiencing different ranges of emotions, maybe even extreme ranges of emotion. But you're flexible in the sense that you're able to come back to a balanced state. You're able to experience opposing feelings, opposing actions, opposing brain activity, and able to find your way back into the middle. And why that requires flexibility is something we're going to talk about today. So, what we've covered so far is looking at balanced brain when it comes to boredom, patience, presence, and today we're going to talk about resiliency. And before I dive into the science behind resiliency, what we suspect it looks like in the brain, because an evolving field, there's not a clear answer to that right now, but there is some interesting studies that I will share. So, what that looks like at the level of your brain, I want to go through my definition of resiliency. So, when we think of resiliency, we think of the ability to overcome obstacles, to be able to overcome hardships, to not have these hardships kind of keep you stagnant or keep you down, keep you in a fixed, stuck state. Now, when we think of resiliency, this is something that I talk about all the time, right? Ultimately, the work that I do, that I share with others, is to rewire your brain for resiliency. A lot of people, when they think of resiliency, they think of these really big moments, right? So, really traumatic experiences, maybe different illnesses, right? Chronic illnesses, mental health illnesses. Um, they also think about traumatic events, like I mentioned, and the idea that you're overcoming kind of like one or two really big things and able to show up. Not necessarily as the fullest version of yourself. I do think that's something that people miss or is just not talked about as much for many reasons that I won't dive into right now. But the idea that, you're still able to show up, be functional despite having traumatic things have happened to you or you're going through hardship of some kind. And I've actually felt that in the community, when we think of resiliency, that is almost a bit disempowering. Like I've had people in comment section before or people that I do intake calls with say, that they would call themselves resilient and they almost like huff and sigh and roll their eyes because they're like, I don't want to be resilient anymore. I just want to enjoy my life. And that, so many things are thrown at me and I'm constantly resilient. And it's almost like it's a bad thing, like it's an unfair thing that they've had to be resilient. This is not really the definition I mean. When I mean resiliency, I'm the way that I think about it is more day to day, that day to day flexibility. So that idea that in any given day, because we are human and because we have a brain, even if you think you don't have a brain or you think your partner doesn't have a brain or somebody you work with doesn't have a brain, we all have brains. And we all have, circuits in our brain that are triggers, right? Things we're sensitive about, things we're insecure about, things that feel touchy, that feel a bit vulnerable. And throughout our day, throughout our experience, we will encounter moments where those circuits get activated, right? Where we get stressed, where we get insecure, where we worry. And when I think of resiliency from day to day, it's not to not experience those things, but it's to have a resilient brain, meaning your brain is flexible enough to come back to a balanced state, to be able to experience that feeling, right? Whether it's stress, panic, threat, insecurity, worry, and come back to a more neutral state. Now, the way that I like to think about this in the brain, which for me as a neuroscientist, it's a bit of a fun analogy because the way that our circuits are wired, part of the way they're wired is through activity. So the more that we repeat a stimulation of a certain circuit, and a circuit is a group of neurons that are connected together through synapses that form a specific function. The classic example I like to give is riding a bike. When you're young, you spend however long you spend riding a bike, right? I know some people pick it up in a few weeks, some kiddos take a few months. But the idea is that every time that you are riding your bike, you're stimulating the neurons that are required to do that function. And eventually, after high frequency stimulation, so after many, many, many tries of riding a two-wheel bike, you're able to do it. And then you can go many, many years not riding a bike. And then if your friends want to go for a picnic and rent bikes, I'm in Montreal, so I'm thinking of Bixies. If your group of buddies want to rent Bixies, or not rent, rent Bixies, you're able to hop on the bike without needing that same level of stimulation for that circuit to work. You might feel a little wobbly for the first few minutes, but then you ride it, no problem. And that is through this high frequency activity that makes the circuit really strong. Again, cells that fire together, wired together. So when it comes to resiliency and daily resiliency, I like to think of having our strong circuits be more like highways or just roads, right? Roads. And you are like in your car driving, you're driving, you see a sign, it makes you feel some type of way. You're able to make a turn. You're able to turn off to another street. Maybe you're able to make a 3-point turn. Maybe you're lucky and you can do a full UE. I don't know. Either way, you're going down a path, you're going down the path, you're looking at the surroundings, you're like, oh, the trees are looking darker. Oh, it is starting to pour rain. Oh, it is like not great in this corner of my brain. Let's turn this ship around, except you're in your car. Trying to not mix metaphors. Now, this is what I would consider a resilient brain, a flexible brain, a malleable brain. The opposite of that would be, let's say these strong circuits are railway tracks, so tracks for a train, and you're going in one direction for the train, and you're observing the same things, right? You're going to be seeing these dark trees, you're going to see these clouds, you're going to see rain, it's going to start thundering. You want to turn that train around, but you can't. It takes so long to turn a train around, right? You have to put on the brakes, right? And the train is going at a decent clip. Every train is different, right? But at a decent speed, it has so much weight behind it, right? So even that in itself, turning is going to take a long time. Then you have to turn the train around, right? So, I mean, I don't know the exact method that they do this. I'm sure it's more sophisticated now, but I remember as a kid visiting a train station, kind of like in Northern Ontario, and it looked pretty cumbersome to turn a train 160 degrees. There was like a track, and then there was a thing to turn the track, and you kind of have to do it like one cart at a time, and then you can go in another direction. And so this brain I would consider less flexible, less resilient, because once it hits that track, it is gaining momentum in that track, and slowing down that momentum and turning it around is really challenging. And so if you're in this space of being on the railway track, which I'll share with you a story how this shows up in my life, and I think I'll save it there. I'll bring this back, because if you're in this camp, it doesn't mean that it's impossible to change, but the expectations are different here. But the goal ideally is that our brain is full of these roads that we're able to navigate easily, and not that we go down the road that not that we don't go down the road that has the doom and gloom vibe, but when we do, we're able to back out of it, no problem. And so when I think of I'm not going to share the big kind of traumatic, difficult hardship moments in my life in which I were resilient. I want to talk about the ways that I show up as resilient as I possibly can every single day, recognizing that I'm human, recognize that I make mistakes, and recognizing that that is a part of the resilient brain process. That is a part about being flexible, is still being proud and, you know, learning all the way through, even when you show up and make mistakes. And I would have to say, by far, where I use this concept the most is in my current relationship. So, my partner, he and I have been together for over 3 years, and it has officially been over a year that we've lived together. Even before living together, we spent quite a bit of time together, so that process felt pretty natural. But like anybody who's lived with someone before, there is there is definitely bumps. And I find one of the strengths that my partner and I have is that we're both big communicators. And in some ways, right, like anything, there's many positive sides to being a couple that communicates a lot. And I think more positive sides than negative sides. But let me tell you, with lots of communication, it opens up a lot of opportunities to be triggered. And since we were living together, we had a lot more things to manage together as a couple, a lot more decisions that we had to make together, and also just a lot more conversations. And one really kind of innocent example that I'll share with you guys here is I love to cook. So what's been really nice about having somebody live with me, right? Having a partner, having somebody I love, is to be able to cook for both of us. Honestly, it just helps with my motivation to cook. I mean, I love the girl dinner moments when I was single, where I would just put like random stuff together from my fridge. But it's been a lot of fun having somebody who loves to eat and I can cook for, right? We divvy up the tasks in different ways, don't you worry. But my partner, he has an Italian mom. She doesn't love to cook, so she says, but she's an incredible cook. Like 10 out of 10, makes these beautiful, beautiful meals, and it's just naturally really gifted. I swear there's gotta be a gene in there somewhere, um, for Italians that are just like incredible cooks. And apparently, at their house, what was really common, so my partner, he has an older brother, and his older brother and his father would give their mom, who would make the meal, they would share what they liked about it, but they also would share ways to improve it. Now, this was all this was all normal. Like, this was normal in their house. The mom was fine with this, the dad was fine with this, the kiddos were fine with this. And it was all kind of fair game, and it was just more like, how do we improve the meal for next time? But there was still this level of gratitude that the mom made the meal for them. Now, never would I ever do this in my house growing up, because what on earth, whatever my mom served, and my mom also a great cook. She also worked incredibly, incredibly hard. She was like VP, C-suite level, corporate, like worked all day. And by the time she got home, she was still in her corporate outfit, making dinner for the family, sitting down all together, having great chats. Like dinner time was a very sacred, special time in our house, which my partner and I have been able to recreate. And I'm very happy about that. But we would never be like, "Oh, this is great, but you could improve it this way." Because to us, and everybody's different, right? To us, that is just straight up rude, right? Like, it makes you sound so incredibly ungrateful for the meal that you got presented, right? So you'd eat it, you'd be quiet, you'd be grateful, and that was that. And I started noticing this with my partner when we were spending more time together, and especially when he moved in, that, this was happening. And he was giving kind of like little pointers or little suggestions. And what's interesting was that my reaction to it, because I have my own triggers, sensitivities. I've talked about this in a few podcasts before, like core stress circuits, things that, like, when they're activated, I get full blown stressed out. And with my partner, sometimes these literally wouldn't bother me at all, and I would be pretty objective about it, and I'd be like, "Oh, yeah, like, you could definitely add that, or you could add this," and we'd participate, and it would be fun, and it would be fine. And then other times, I could feel my stress response turn on immediately. And what that felt like for me and my body, which is super interesting, because it indicates to me that it's a severe threat that I'm detecting that he's doing this, is, I would feel it's so funny because this does happen, so it's hard to know if, like, I actually feel this or because I know the science, I feel it even more, but I could feel almost like the blood, like, rushing out of my face, kinda, like, leaving this area. My body get very, very tense, very, very rigid, and almost like my mind went blank and my stomach would drop. Right? So this is like, I'm 10 out of 10 triggered by the fact that he thinks that this could have used more cheese, And of course, there's other conversations we have, and in partnership is where you're most vulnerable. And so I was noticing that this would happen occasionally. And, you know, we would have a conversation about it. It would take so much energy out of me to try and rectify this when I was in that state. And there's a lot of biological reasons for this, but that part is not as important. And I'll explain. There's another episode on like fear and triggers, and I will put that in the show notes as well. Or if I don't have it, I'll create one soon. But, like, I'd be crying, I'd be really upset, like, it would just lead me to a place when we think of that train analogy, I just, like, kept going, like, it's just, like, one track straight straight to the dumps with this one comment, and it would take so much energy, right? Like, I'd be crying, um, would never know what to say, I would, be apologizing, but also like trying to get him to change his behavior. And at the end of these really tough conversations, and some conversations are tough and it's okay, right? Like it kind of needs to happen when you're again, when you're in a partnership, like you are both balancing a lot, right? So there's going to be moments where you make mistakes. And what I was noticing, that's when I was making mistakes, sometimes I would take it way harder than others. And at the end of these more difficult conversations where I was feeling like exhausted, depleted, just having them, what I noticed my partner always came to is that, he was bringing up these things because he's really invested in the relationship. He's really invested in me and he like loves me. And it's not, the moral of the story is it's not coming from a malicious, mean, trying to put me down place. And so when that really locked in for me, like, okay, well, I do trust him, right? And I do trust that these comments are not coming from a malicious, mean place, then why am I feeling under attack every time I receive them, right? Why am I feeling like it is a level 10 threat every time I receive them? And what I noticed is that throughout the day, depending what happened to me that day that I wasn't maybe able to disentangle from, if I had a more stressful day, right? If I had a day where I was worrying more, if I had a day where I was thinking about the future more, if I was having a day where I was particularly critical of myself, and again, thinking of me on that train, I was going down that track, a comment as simple as this needs more cheese tipped me over. And that's not my partner's fault. And in a way, I don't like to say it's my fault either, but I am empowered to make that change, right? I did come into that situation already heading like a one-way track, right? And resiliency in those moments, right, is seeing yourself going in one direction and finding a way to turn yourself around. And that is the ultimate goal. And that is something that I've been working on for a long time. And I will share, once I dive into the science, some emerging science, which shows this analogy might be true. One way that I do this now that's been incredibly helpful. Now, when it comes to the level of your brain, having this resiliency, this flexibility, this daily flexibility, scientists have started honing in on one particular measure that, again, they've been kind of more deeply digging into. So I'll do my best to explain it, but not to make kind of wild claims yet, because this is a disclaimer that this is relatively new, but it's to look at brain wave complexity. So brain waves are basically synchronous activity with multiple neurons, multiple circuits, because neurons fire using electrical currents, right, through changes in ionic gradients. And through this firing, depending on the rate, right, so the frequency at which it happens, you get these bigger brain waves that you're able to measure. And one of the ways we measured it is through EEGs, which are caps or sensors that you place around your skull that measure this electrical activity. Now, I'll put in the show notes a Brain Fundamentals episode that dives into this a bit deeper. But you get these different bands of brain waves that are, associated with different functions. And of course, these functions differ depending where they are in the brain. But a great example, right, is a low frequency brain activity, brain wave activity delta, which is 1 to 2 hertz, is associated with sleep. But once you get into the higher range, right, like between 15 to 35, that's your beta brainwave, which is associated with learning. which makes sense when we think about that high frequency brain activity helping to strengthen circuits, right? Because when we're changing around circuits, we're essentially learning new functions or new information, new tasks. There's a cool measure we can get called the Limple-Ziv complexity measure, which is shortened to LZC. Now you guys can tell I'm from Canada, Z. Um, and here, what it looks at is it looks at multiple areas of the brain usually, although all studies do this a bit differently, but it looks at brain wave complexity. Now, imagine somebody was singing a song to you. Like, let's think of those like one-hit wonder bop songs, right? They usually have like a chorus that is really simple and repeated. Maybe it's like 2 or 3 words. Da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da, da 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 da. So that is something we would consider if we were considering those brain waves, right? Like, let's say somebody's brain is firing between 2 brain waves at the same rhythm for a period of time. That's a brainwave activity that has low complexity. It has a low LZC score. Now, if we think of a symphony, right, that has multiple instruments, that's like 10 minutes long, that has these rises and falls and these melodies and low notes, and there's no real course, that is something we would consider to have high complexity because there isn't really a constant repeating pattern. In that song, there's something different happening every 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 10 seconds. That's not really repeating in nature. And with our brain, it's very similar, right? We can have a brain that is experiencing lots of different types of brainwave activity over the course of like 10, 15 minutes, right? Different brain waves, different kind of amplitudes or powers of that brainwave. It's shifting every 30 seconds, minute. And that we would consider having a high score. So a high LZC score. Now, the reason why this is important is because when we think of a flexible brain, we think of a brain that's able to experience a lot of different types of activity, not necessarily all at once, but in a short period of time. And there is a really interesting study that showed the impact of this score related to things that were cognitively and physically demanding. So the way the study looked at was kind of looking at stress or fatigue in a way. And so they gave the participants, they all had an EEG cap, and they were either doing a physically demanding task or they were doing a mentally demanding task. And what they found, especially looking at areas in the front or just kind of behind the front, right, which would be parietal lobe, that there is a reduced complexity. So the LZC scores were reduced. And what they found was that it kind of supported the idea that when the brain is under a substantial demand, which it is when we're under a threat, that the dynamic activity of the brain is reduced. They are looking at this in the context of anxiety and depression. Those studies are relatively new. The results on occasion are mixed, so I don't want to come here with any bold claims, but there is an interesting hypothesis that's starting to form. And when we think of my example, when it comes to being in a low flexibility state, so let's say, and maybe if my partner is open to me wearing an EEG cap at dinner, maybe I should do this and measure my LZC score in real time. But if I'm coming in with a low flexibility score and my partner brings up a stressor, I'm not going to be potentially as equipped to deal with it, right? Because one way to think about it is, let's say we were to look in my own kind of voice, right? Like the stories that I tell myself, right? Because we all have stories that we tell ourselves every day. But if I'm going throughout my day and I'm thinking like, I'm worried here, this is a threat, I'm insecure here, this is a threat, what happens here, this is a threat. And I'm coming in again that can be incredibly cognitively demanding on our brain. It's incredibly energetically demanding on our brain and our body. So I'm coming in thinking threat, threat, threat all day. My partner says this needs more cheese. What do you think is coming? Threat, threat, threat. And this is the idea that the way that my brain is operating in terms of complexity and pattern is quite low. Now, if my brain is more flexible, so let's say I did a better job that day or I improved the way that I managed my stress that day, right? So I had some moments where I thought threat, then I had some moments where I felt joy. I had some moments where um, I felt challenged, some moments where I felt proud, some moments where I feel neutral, right? And then I'm coming with this kind of dynamic brain activity, this dynamic neural complexity, right? My LZC score is high. My partner says more cheese. And I think, oh, well, I think more cheese would be a great addition. Or I go, oh, well, I think more cheese would maybe make it too greasy, but we could add, a bit more of something else. I really wish I had a dinner in mind because then I would actually have an ingredient to recommend, but I don't. We just had pizza last night. So in my mind, I'm like, yeah, more cheese, more cheese would be good. Um, and then I'm not even skipping a beat, right? I'm not going down that one-way track. I'm able to turn the ship around. Now, when we think of flexibility, complexity, what I noticed is I've been using one tool recently to manage this phase of my life. This phase of my life, which is so perfect in so many ways, is quite uncertain and kind of, I don't want to say maybe the most uncertain it's ever been, but it's definitely up there, right? I'm in a phase of transition, which we have all experienced and we've all experienced uncertainty. So I'm sure that you can empathize with me on that. And, I can notice myself if I'm not coming back to a balanced place, that I can get into that one track mind. And by the time I'm having dinner with my partner, that conversation is going entirely differently than if I'm able to come back to a balanced place throughout the day. And the tool that I'm using right now, although I've used it before, but this really was inspired by my PhD defense. So I felt pretty calm leading up to my PG defense, like the actual morning of. The weeks, months before, I did not, but I was able to really turn it around the week of. And in the morning, I was happy with, my hair, my outfit, bags are packed. My partner and I, we left to go set up. And the shirt I was wearing, which you'd be able to see on Instagram, is kind of a wraparound that you tie at the back in a nice big bow. And in order to have that wraparound, you have a little slit on the side to feed the fabric through. And I was picking up the Starbucks order because I had people coming in from out of town and the defense was early, it was 9 a.m. So I wanted to make sure that they were able to get their caffeine jolt, as was I, because it was the defense ended up being 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours, which is normal, but it is, like we say in French, exigeant. It takes quite a bit of energy. And the woman at Starbucks was really sweet. Everything was ready. And then she was like, "Oh, doll, come here." And I like she was shorter than me. I crouched down and she was like, "Not to worry you, but there's a hole in your shirt." And I kind of looked down and I laugh. And I'm like, "Oh, well, it's a wraparound shirt. It's supposed to be there. Don't worry." And then I had a moment, I was with my partner alone. I was like, oh man, like, is it really obvious? Like, why didn't I notice it before? Um, then we met up with his family and his mom commented on it, and then his brother commented on it. And I remember I remember the turning point where I was like, I could either let this bother me or I could let this not bother me. And I have the power to choose. And I was able to turn it around. And then nobody said anything about my shirt the rest of the defense. And when I think about this time now, the uncertainty I'm experiencing, for those of you that don't know, is I'm transitioning to work, right? So my PhD is ending, the internship has ended, business is staying consistent, which bless. So I'm so lucky to be doing the work that I'm doing in my business. But for reasons that I won't get into detail now, but are mainly life stage, I'm looking to work, right? I'm looking to be gainfully employed and to gain some really rich, valuable experiences there. And right now, I don't have a job. I'm looking for a job. So instead of getting into this area of like, will I be hired? Where will I be hired? When will I be right? And getting into that kind of loop, because that loop leads me to I'm sorry, I feel like I'm taking you guys really on a journey to my dinner table. But that leads me to freaking out about not having enough cheese, getting incredibly upset, thinking that my partner is crazy critical, even though it's really me being critical of myself. And classic for me, the way my stress presents itself when it's on the extreme side is migraine. Migraine headache, lie down is the only way that I can survive. I connect to throughout my day a moment, a memory in which I felt how I desire to feel. And so in this case, I desire to feel like, even though there is uncertainty, that I feel proud and confident in myself. And that even though things are uncertain, I know that I can rely on myself, my abilities, who I am as a person, and that I can be in flow. And what that means to me in flow is that I'm able to be present, that I'm able to have fun, and that I'm able to roll with the punches. I'm able to be flexible. And the memory that I have now, right, which is again, if you don't have a memory of what you desire to feel already, go ahead and create one, right? Writing down kind of how you desire to feel. What does that look like in the body? What is your resting face? How do activities in your day feel, right? Like, how does it feel for you to just do the groceries? How does it feel to show up for work, right? And if you need any help with this, let me know. But my PhD defense is a potent, powerful memory that I tap into every day, sometimes multiple times a day, because that's how I felt, right? And what's cool about that memory is that there was a lot of uncertainty in that day because I was being evaluated and I didn't know what questions were going to come my way. But I was able to feel present, have fun, and I was calm. Question period, I was like, I swear, the calmest that I'd ever had been. And what I do is I connect with that throughout my day, multiple times a day. And then when it comes to my partner, right? And when we come to dinner and I have those moments and I can start feel myself shifting into perceiving it as a threat, I actually try to remember that moment. It doesn't always happen because it is tricky. Again, the things that we repeat in our brain become stronger, right? Which is important to not skip the step of practicing this when you are not stressed, right? Practicing this when you don't need it, because then when you are stressed, that tool is available to you, right? It's your brain's going to be able to cognitively be like, oh, I can reach for this. This is going to help me. And let me tell you, this has helped me a lot. And I haven't been using this particular example for that long. And I'm excited to tell you kind of how it continues to evolve, but it's not about staying in a perfectly balanced place the whole time. But it is about being able to find that internal neural flexibility. Now, if you're somebody that, when I talk about kind of turning things around, you don't have any experiences of that. I invite you to create your own, like I suggested with the questions, but for you, something that's going to be incredibly helpful is not so much are you able to turn it around, because you might not be able to. But what you can start doing, which is a sign that the work is working, that your brain is starting to change, is slow the train down, right? So with the cheese example at dinner, let's say I'm unable to turn it around, but I can slow the train down. Maybe that means that I don't attack my partner right away. Maybe it means that I just say, okay, thanks for letting me know. And then I just calm myself down. And seeing that as your brain winning is super important. And the only way that you can really take those steps to get to a point where you can turn triggers around within 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute. So that is your homework, is to find that memory or create that memory and tap into it every day. And the way that you tap into it, at least the way that I like to tap into it, is I like to see it. And so some people like to see it in third person, so almost like they're an observer in the room and they can see the memory play out. For me, there's a particular moment in the question period during my PG defense where I felt really like in flow, really present, having fun. And I remember what the room looked like at that time and how I felt. And so that's where I go. I go kind of like almost like first person, like if I were to implant myself in my own body in that moment, and I tap into it. If you're like, this all makes sense, but I'm still not getting it, another thing you can do is figure out how it would take shape in your body, right? So I remember in that moment that I was really like, my eyes were locked in, my shoulders were relaxed, my chest was open, and for whatever reason, my chin was down because of who I was like. I was kind of like, I was standing up, right? And everybody was sitting down or on a Zoom screen. So I remember, you guys, if you're watching, I'm just like, my hands are going crazy. I was like, particular angle. So even using that like particular angle and taking shape of it in your body is a way for you to stimulate it in your brain. So picking that memory, tapping into it as much as you can, and also recognizing that even slowing down a reaction is progress in your brain. So if you love this episode, if you have questions about what I talked about, please don't be shy to reach out to me. You can do so in the comments. You can also find my email below. And another really great resource for this is the level of stress regulation quiz. So I have a quiz that rates your brain's level of stress regulation. And this can really help with this particular episode in particular, because it'll help you set expectations as to what to expect from your brain. And that in itself is huge, because then you can start tracking and monitoring when your brain is winning. And that helps progress so much. So that'll be in the show notes. There we go. Show notes. There'll be a link in the show notes below. And the last thing I want to offer is to hop on my email list if you want to participate in any of the free webinars. We try to do one once a month where we unpack a particular neuroscience topic in more depth than we do on the podcast. We go through studies, we go through brain regions, we go through experiments, all that fun stuff. And then I leave a really healthy portion for question answer, so that the biggest thing that I find people struggle with is how to integrate the information into their daily life. And that's really what the Q&A is for. So if you want to be aware of when those happen, what the topics are, hop on the email list. And if you're on the email list, there's also something I'm cooking up that's going to be free, that's going to be really rich in information that I'm keeping to myself for now because I'm in the process of creating it. But if you're looking for free neuroscience resources, the email list is the place to go. And that is it for now for Balanced Brain. Thank you so much for listening. I'm looking forward to hearing about your questions, reflections, your thoughts, and I'm wishing you a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.